Welcome to another episode of Discovering the Book of Mormon through Science and Exploration. Today I'm going to demonstrate a very simple way of determining where the Lord was when he visited the Nephites and the Lamanites. But first, let's put aside all those preconceived eternal maps that people claim show the Book of Mormon lands. Let's put aside what they claim some church leaders said or did not say, or all that pseudo-archaeology that's been proven over and over again to be false. We will deal with real Book of Mormon archaeology in future episodes. All we need to do is to carefully read what Jesus Christ said when he visited his other sheep and see where his words lead us. All we need to know is the language the Lord spoke. If he spoke Navajo, he must have been in what is today the southwest portion of the United States. If he spoke Maya, then he must have been in Central America. Of course, we do not know the ethnic language the Lord spoke when he talked to the Nephites and the Lamanites. What we do know is that he used the language style of metaphoric analogies. A metaphoric analogy combines the characteristics of both a metaphor and an analogy. It uses a metaphor to create a comparison and then extends that comparison to explain or clarify a concept, much like a regular analogy does. It essentially uses a metaphoric comparison to build an analogy. When trying to understand a new concept, if the listener can relate to the analogies, it becomes a very effective teaching method. However, if the listener cannot relate to the analogy, then the concept is lost, and the listener is confused by the analogy. For example, the Lord taught his other sheep in the New World that they were the salt of the earth. If the listener had never tasted salt and knew its effect on seasoning foods, the analogy would be meaningless, and the spiritual concept it was meant to convey would be confused at best. Furthermore, if the listener had never seen a sheep, they must have wondered what kind of a beast is the Lord referring to: a dragon, a lizard, a buffalo? To maximize the effectiveness of his teachings, undoubtedly the Lord selected items for his analogies from those things that were familiar in the everyday lives of his listeners. Let's read the analogies that are found in the third book of Nephi that the Lord used, and let's determine who was his audience. We can now see if these analogies would have made sense to the people living in the Book of Mormon times in the three most common geographical models proposed for the lands of the Book of Mormon: Mesoamerica, Heartland, and Peru. Here is a list of 22 analogies the Lord used while teaching in the Promised Land. Salt. Archaeologists tell us that salt was used by indigenous people throughout all the pre-Columbian Americas. So the Lord's analogy would have conveyed meaning to audiences in all three of the proposed models for the Book of Mormon lands. Sheep. With the exception of hunting dogs, the Hopewell people of the Heartland model had no domesticated animals. In Mesoamerica, the only domesticated animals were ducks, turkeys, dogs for food, and rabbits. If the Lord referred to these people as his other sheep, they would have been totally lost. In Peru, the situation would have been completely different. For centuries after the Spanish arrived in South America, they thought the alpaca was a sheep. Nephi would have taught the same. In the Nephite language, the alpaca was undoubtedly called a sheep. Flocks. Without domesticated animals, there would have been no animals in the Heartland or Mesoamerican models that the people could have related to as the Lord's flocks of sheep. When the Spanish arrived in Peru, they saw great herds of alpacas. One Peruvian had a flock of 40,000 alpacas. Shepherds. The Lord referred to himself as the Good Shepherd. Without flocks, there are no shepherds. The ancient Peruvians had professional shepherds. Wolves. The wolf was found among the indigenous people in the Heartland model, the Mesoamerican model, and the Peru model. Chickens. In the pre-Columbian Western Hemisphere, chickens only existed along the west coast of South America. Fuller's soap. This type of soap is used for cleaning wool. Without sheep or other form of wool in regions north of Panama, the term would have had no meaning in those areas. The Peruvians were the master weavers of the ancient world. They cleaned their wool before spinning it. Candlesticks. A form of candle existed in ancient Mesoamerica and Peru. However, in the Heartland model, the hope wheel had no type of candle whatsoever. Horses. Despite some wild speculation, after hundreds of thousands of excavations in the United States and hundreds of thousands of more excavations in Central America, bones of horses that date back to Book of Mormon times have never been found. So, what was the horse of the Book of Mormon? The most probable explanation are the llamas of Peru. They look like a small horse and are used in a similar manner. The Incas used the short-haired llamas for riding, while the long-haired llamas were used as pack animals. So similar are the two animals that the Incas called the Spanish horses llamas. It is reasonable to assume that in the Nephite language, llamas were called horses. Gold. When the Lord spoke of gold, it would have made perfect sense to the Peruvians. The Nephites had gold in abundance, and so did the ancient Peruvians. You cannot have gold plates without gold. There was no gold worked in the Heartland or Mesoamerica during the Book of Mormon times. Plates. You could not have the Book of Mormon without hammered gold plates. There is no gold anywhere in North America or Central America during Book of Mormon times. Hammered gold was common among all classes of people in ancient Peru. The Lord's audience in Peru would have known exactly what the Lord was talking about when he mentioned plates of metal. Silver. Like gold, silver was not known among the Heartland people or the Mesoamerican people during Book of Mormon times. It was something strange to them. The term silver would have been meaningless to them. Also, like gold, silver was a common commodity to the Nephites in Peru. Refiner's fire. The Lord spoke of the refiner's fire. Since there was no smelting of metals in the Heartland or Mesoamerica, the phrase would have been confusing to audiences in those areas. Not so in Peru, where smelting existed in both Jaredite and Nephite times. Smith's coals. Like the refiner's fire, the analogy of Smith's coals would only have had meaning to the Peruvians in Book of Mormon times. Books. Did the ancients in the Americas understand what the Lord meant by books? When the Incas were shown the Spanish Bible, they told the conquistadors that their ancient ancestors once had books of that nature. The tree bark writings of the Mayans could also be considered books. In North America, the analogy of a book would have meant nothing. Swine. The Spanish believed that the Mesoamerican and South American Picari were a type of pig. The Nephites probably believed the same. There is no comparable animal in the heartland region of North America. Lions. If we assume that the puma or mountain lion is the lion spoken of by the Lord, then the lions did exist in the wilds of the heartland, Mesopotamia, and Peruvian models. Cups. The people in all three geographical models had excellent pottery skills, so a cup would have been common to them. Jewelry. Like pottery, jewelry was common among all the people of the ancient Americas during Book of Mormon times. Brass. The Peruvians were superior metallurgists. They created over 60 alloys. Again, no such skills were found in the heartland or Mesoamerican areas. Swords. The Peruvians used hardened copper to cover the wood of their swords. In Mesoamerica, wood and stones were used to create a type of sword. There were no swords in the heartland area. Bread, fruit, and wine. Comparable foods would have existed in all the Americas at the time the Lord visited the Nephites. It goes without saying that the Lord could have and probably did visit other people in the ancient Americas and other parts of the world. But who were the people he taught in the book of 3rd Nephi in the Book of Mormon? It is very unlikely that it would have been the people of the heartland in North America. Only 6 of the Lord's analogies would have made any sense to them whatsoever. They would have been totally confused. The Hopewell people of the heartland model would have had no idea what the Lord was referring to when he talked of sheep, chickens, fuller's soap, candlesticks, horses, gold, metal plates, silver, refiner's fire, smith's coals, swine, books, brass, swords, and flocks and shepherds. The same would have been true for the people living in Mesoamerica. Of the Lord's 22 analogies, only 10, less than half, would have had any meaning to them. Ancient Peru presents a completely different image. Each of the 22 analogies the Lord taught with related to the items of the Peruvians' everyday lives. The analogies would have been rich in meaning and would have conveyed spiritual messages. They would have understood the Lord completely. This graph illustrates just how poorly the people in the Heartland and Mesoamerica models would have understood the Lord's analogies and the eternal truths they are meant to convey. The Lord spoke the language of metaphorical analogies. He selected his analogies very carefully so that the people he was teaching could understand how they related to their everyday lives. Again, if you want to know where the Lord taught the Nephites and Lamanites, read carefully his words as recorded in the book of 3rd Nephi. Or you can rely on the teachings of President Russell M. Nelson, who taught the missionaries in Brazil that to get their investigators interested in the gospel, they should tell them about Christ's mission in South America. Learn about our tours to Peru on our website, christinperu.com. And please take the time to subscribe to this channel. Thank you for listening.